On the morning of February 8, 1924, in the cold cell at Nevada State Prison in Carson City, G. John was no longer the cold-blooded gangster. Just hours earlier, this 29-year-old gang assassin had maintained a terrifying calm when speaking to reporters. Gas is the same as a noose or bullets. I'm not worried. But now, as the darkness of death swallowed him second by second, everything became too real. G. John began to cry. Tears rolled down the gaunt face of a criminal who once didn't hesitate to pull the trigger and kill. The guards looked at him with disgust. One of them coldly said, "Die like a man, John." But it wasn't only the condemned man who was afraid. The executioners were trembling too. They were about to do something never before tested in history: execute someone with poison gas. John didn't know that he was not just a criminal about to die, but also a guinea pig of history. Last night, he barely slept. The footsteps of patrolling guards echoed regularly in the corridor, each step like a backward beat of his remaining time. The last meal was placed before him, but G. John had been fasting for days. His already small 5'4" frame now weighed just under 92 pounds. He wasn't afraid of death by bullet or noose. At least, he knew how those worked. But gas? Nobody knew, not even the people about to kill him. At 9:40 a.m., G. John was led into the execution chamber, a space hastily converted from the prison's meat locker. He was strapped tightly to a metal chair, hands, feet, stomach, chest, all bound tight with leather straps. Outside the thick glass door, witnesses stood chain-smoking, as if tobacco smoke could protect them from any stray gas that might escape. Inside, an electric heater was installed to keep the room temperature at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to prevent the gas from condensing. But the heater had broken down. The temperature was only 52 degrees. No one realized this until it was too late. When the pump turned on, the sudden noise made G. John flinch. He turned his head, eyes wide with terror. Hydrocyanic acid, the poison discovered by Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele in 1782, and the same substance that killed him in 1786, began pumping into the room. Just 5 seconds. 5 seconds was enough for G. John to lose consciousness, but his body wouldn't die easily. For the next 6 minutes, witnesses watched his head bob up and down continuously, as if trying to escape a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. On the floor, pools of acid began condensing, reflecting the dim light. The heavy chemical smell spread. And then, G. John stopped moving. When the doctor pronounced him dead, no one knew what to do next. They could only stand and wait for the gas to dissipate, wait for the acid pools to evaporate. No one dared perform an autopsy, fearing G. John's body still contained poison and might release more gas. The question hung heavy in the air. Was this the future of capital punishment? To understand why G. John had to die by poison gas, we must travel back in time to 1905, to Sing Sing Prison in New York. That's where a psychiatrist named Alan McLean Hamilton from Brooklyn witnessed something he would never forget. Hamilton was no stranger to the darkness of the human mind. He specialized in psychological trauma and criminal insanity, which brought him into frequent contact with the criminal justice system. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen in that execution chamber. 2 criminals, Frank Ramieri and Adolf Koenig, were to be executed by electric chair. The first execution went smoothly. Hamilton, who had no sympathy for Ramieri and described him as a degenerate Italian, stood watching with a cold attitude as electricity coursed through the prisoner's body. In the blink of an eye, Ramieri became a soft, soulless mass of flesh. Hamilton felt nothing. But the second one was completely different. When Adolf Koenig was strapped into the electric chair, something was wrong. When the switch was flipped, a heavy stench began spreading through the room, the smell of burning human flesh. Hamilton had smelled disinfectant, disease, death in mental hospitals. But this was different. It penetrated his nose, throat, even his mind. In his 1916 memoir, he wrote, "It did not take long for my nerves and stomach to revolt, and I hastened outside for fresh air and to leave Sing Sing as quickly as possible." That night, Hamilton couldn't sleep. The images and smells haunted him. In the following weeks, he couldn't stop thinking, was there another way? Some way to kill people without cooking them? The answer came from science. Hamilton began researching alternative methods and found a perfect candidate: gas, specifically hydrocyanic acid or hydrogen cyanide. This substance had a dark history. In 1782, Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele isolated hydrocyanic acid from Prussian blue pigment, the deep blue color that artists had used since the early 18th century. Scheele was a curious genius, but also recklessly dangerous. He had the habit of smelling and tasting every new substance he discovered, including hydrogen cyanide. In 1785, Scheele's kidneys failed. In 1786, he died at age 43. The official explanation was mercury poisoning, but tasting deadly poison certainly didn't help. Hydrocyanic acid in gas form is called hydrogen cyanide gas, and it kills by asphyxiating cells. Tissues, organs, and most importantly the brain cannot receive the oxygen they need. The body essentially suffocates from the inside. As Hamilton was publishing his memoir in 1916, World War I was raging. Since 1915, both the Allied and Central Powers had been using poison gas to spread death and panic among enemy ranks. In July 1916, at the Battle of the Somme, French forces began testing hydrogen cyanide through artillery shells. Although it caused casualties, the gas wasn't very effective on open battlefields. It was very difficult to achieve the concentration needed to kill. But for Hamilton, this was the breakthrough. Inside a sealed room, achieving lethal concentration would be as easy as turning your hand. Hamilton and his ally, Dr. Delos Turner of the U.S. Army, began a speaking tour across states, seeking someone to accept the new method. Hamilton died in 1919 and never saw his gas chamber work, but Turner continued, and in 1921, he found a taker: the state of Nevada. Nevada would be the pioneer bringing the execution gas chamber to the world, and they needed a death row inmate. They needed G. John. G. John was not a random criminal. He was a product of his time and circumstances. Born in Guangdong, China around 1895, John arrived in San Francisco when he was just 12 or 13 years old and spent most of his life in the city's Chinatown. For an immigrant boy who didn't speak English and had no family, the legal path to success was virtually non-existent. G. John quickly realized that survival didn't lie in education or working in laundries. It lay in power, and power belonged to the Tong gangs. He joined the Hip Sing Tong, one of the most powerful secret societies in Chinatown. Opium trafficking, bootlegging during Prohibition, John made money. But when war broke out with the rival Bing Kong Tong, John was no longer a merchant. He became a warrior, and a warrior's mission was only one thing: kill. In August 1921, G. John and his young apprentice Hugh Sing traveled to Mena, Nevada. This was no vacation. They came to kill Tom Kwong Ki, a 74-year-old man who owned a laundry in town and was considered a member of the Bing Kong Tong. On August 27th, they knocked on Tom's door. When the old man opened it, Hugh Sing, young and having never killed before, stood frozen like a statue. But G. John didn't hesitate. Standing only 5'4", John wasn't intimidating in appearance, but he was a man of action. He pulled the trigger twice. Tom Kwong Ki fell, dead on the spot. Hours later, both were arrested in Reno. Hugh Sing, born in America and cooperating with authorities, was sentenced to life and released in 1934. But G. John, whom the judge described as an illiterate Chinese unfamiliar with American customs, was the trigger man. He was sentenced to death. Nevada had their death row inmate. Now they just needed to figure out how to kill him. Things didn't go as smoothly as they thought. Their supplier of hydrocyanic acid was the California Cyanide Company in Los Angeles, a pest control company. They killed termites and cockroaches, not people. When Nevada prison contacted them, the company refused to deliver for this purpose, so a prison representative had to pick it up himself. Next, 4 guards felt uncomfortable with the process and resigned. Officials decided to try a secret execution. One night, they pumped hydrogen cyanide into G. John's cell while he slept, but the gas just leaked out. Failure. Finally, they set up a proper execution chamber, very proper, in the prison meat locker. But they couldn't just send someone in there without testing first, so they executed 2 cats. After a painless death taking just 15 seconds, the gas chamber was declared ready. In the months in his death row cell, G. John began fasting. His already small body grew increasingly emaciated. On the morning of execution, he weighed less than 92 pounds, a skeleton wrapped in skin. His mind collapsed as well. The cold-blooded killer, who hadn't hesitated to kill an old man, now cried like a child. The guards felt no sympathy. They were disgusted. "Die like a man, John," one of them barked. He was strapped into the metal chair. At 9:40 a.m., the gas was released. Outside, witnesses chain-smoked frantically, believing tobacco smoke would protect them from any stray gas. John turned his head when the pump started, startled by the noise. 5 seconds later, he was unconscious, but his body wouldn't surrender. For 6 minutes, his head bobbed up and down continuously. On the floor, pools of acid condensed because the heater had broken and the temperature was too low. When it was all over, no one knew what to do. The doctor refused to perform an autopsy, fearing the body would release more gas. Delos Turner, who wanted to see his invention work, suggested injecting camphor into G. John to see if he could be revived. The request was denied. But rumors spread. G. John wasn't really dead, just in suspended animation. When he was buried in Mineral County, Nevada, locals genuinely feared he would come back to life and become some kind of vengeful zombie. Some journalists were outraged. A San Jose Mercury news reporter wrote, "100 years hence, Nevada will be regarded as a barbarous commonwealth controlled by savages with only the outward symbols of civilization." But many others thought the execution was a success. According to the Nevada State Journal, Nevada's novel capital punishment law upheld by highest court. Humane. The precedent was set. Over the next 15 years, Nevada would execute 8 more people by gas chamber. By 1934, states like Colorado and Arizona also began using it. The gas chamber was no longer an experiment, it was the future. The gas chamber didn't stop at Nevada. By 1936, 11% of executions in America were carried out by poison gas. In 1934, Colorado and Arizona began using gas chambers. In 1936, North Carolina followed. By the end of the 1930s, Wyoming, Missouri, California, and Oregon had all built their own gas chambers. Hamilton's humane method was spreading like a pandemic. But across the Atlantic, a much darker story was unfolding. Lithuania used gas chambers in Kaunas from 1937, executing at least 9 people before 1940. The Soviet Union had dushegubki, gas vans, literally meaning soul destroyers or soul killers. Victims were seized, stuffed into vans, and exhaust was pumped into the back, killing them en route. Nazi Germany found this idea very useful and began doing the same thing at the start of the war. A witness described the horrific scene. Victims were packed in until there was no room left. Then the van was sealed and poison smoke was pumped in. From outside, screams and pounding on the walls could be heard as victims slowly died. The bodies were described as blue-gray, soaked with sweat and urine, legs covered with feces and menstrual blood. But even this wasn't efficient enough for the Nazis. They needed to kill faster, more. So they developed Zyklon B, a form of hydrocyanic acid, and official gas chambers were installed in concentration camps. At the height of the Holocaust, the Nazis killed up to 6,000 people every day at Auschwitz alone. What Hamilton thought was humane had become a tool of industrial-scale genocide. When the Allies liberated Europe in the spring of 1945, the entire world witnessed the horror of the Holocaust. The gas chambers, where millions of Jews, Romani, homosexuals, and disabled people had been murdered, left an indelible stain on humanity. The phrase gas chamber was now synonymous with Holocaust, so you'd think the victorious United States would steer clear of this method, right? But you'd be wrong. In 1945, the gas chamber was the second most popular execution method in America, right after the electric chair. More than a quarter of Americans executed that year died by poison gas. And this continued. According to the Washington Post, 600 people died this way from 1924 to 1999. Author Billy Wayne Sinclair, a former death row inmate, believes the actual number is much higher, 955 men and 7 women. But humane was a lie. In 1983, Jimmy Lee Gray, who kidnapped, raped, and killed 3-year-old Doressa Jean Scales, was taken to the gas chamber in Mississippi. Because his head wasn't properly secured, Gray could move freely. When the gas flooded in, he began banging his head against a nearby steel pole. A witnessing doctor described, he lifted his entire body, writhed, jerked the restraints. Saliva poured from his mouth, eyes wide open. He looked through the window. His fingers clenched his thumbs. His chest convulsed in horrible pain. Gray took 12 minutes to die. In 1992, Donald Harding in Arizona convulsed for over 10 minutes, his body shaking from spasms. His lawyer called the scene slow, painful, degrading, and inhumane. By the late 1990s, the gas chamber had nearly disappeared. In 1999, Walter Legrand became the last person executed by hydrogen cyanide gas. For 25 years, no one else had to die this way. Until 2024. Alabama decided to revive the gas chamber, but this time using nitrogen hypoxia, a method never documented in any execution anywhere in the world. Kenneth Eugene Smith, who had survived a botched lethal injection execution in 2022, was the first. On January 25, 2024, 2 weeks before the 100th anniversary of G. John, Smith was taken to the gas chamber. Gas was pumped in at 7:57 p.m. Witnesses said Smith remained conscious for several minutes and struggled violently. After 5 minutes, he appeared unconscious but continued struggling for another 6 minutes. At 8:25 p.m., nearly half an hour after beginning, he was pronounced dead. 8 months later, Alan Miller followed Smith into the gas chamber. Witness Lauren Gill described, Miller visibly struggled for about 2 minutes, shaking and jerking the restraints. Then he gasped for air continuously for the next 5 or 6 minutes. In October 2025, Anthony Boyd was executed. Witnesses said Boyd reacted violently to the gas, struggling violently. He gasped 225 times and was still breathing deeply nearly 20 minutes after the execution began. It took him 36 minutes to die. But Alabama Corrections Commissioner John Q. Hamm declared these movements were involuntary and occurred when Smith was unconscious. Hamm said Smith held his breath for about 4 minutes, making the convulsions look worse. State Attorney General Steve Marshall agreed, calling nitrogen hypoxia an effective and humane method of execution. So 100 years after G. John's grotesque spectacle, poison gas returns. There are currently 157 death row inmates in Alabama. Some of them will die in the gas chamber. The San Jose Mercury news journalist once predicted Nevada would be seen as a barbarous commonwealth controlled by savages. He was completely wrong. To those at the Alabama Department of Corrections and elsewhere across the United States, the Nevadans were pioneers with ideas ahead of their time. The gas chamber isn't dead, it's just sleeping, waiting.